Feedback is information with which a performer can improve their performance, and we want to look at the characteristics of different kinds of feedback. So first of all, I'm going to bring your attention to the distinctions between intrinsic feedback and what we're going to refer to here as extrinsic feedback. These are kind of two sides of the same coin. And we should be clear here, we're not arguing that either one is better. We're just looking at the distinctions and the similarities between them. So we've got this sort of distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic feedback. So I want to focus on intrinsic first of all. I'm going to kind of map this out here. I want to bring this to here, and I want to bring this down like this. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. Intrinsic feedback is information from within the performer. So as an example, the middle ear of a performer gives them a sense of equilibrium. In other words, the performer can answer the question, am I in balance? Am I out of balance? We have this intrinsic sense. This is information that the performer can then use to adjust. Think about a skier on the moguls. Think about a gymnast trying to balance. Think about a gymnast in the crucifix position on the rings. They'd have a sense of equilibrium. Secondly, we have a notion of proprioception. And proprioception relates to a couple of things, but it relates to a sense of one's own movement and position. And a nice word to link that to is kinesthesis. Kinesthesis, a knowledge of whether I am in the right position and in the right and utilizing the right technique as required. So those are some nice intrinsic feedback, and consider that we can adjust our performance based on that. Now, extrinsic is slightly different. I'm going to kind of sketch this one over here and this one just down here because I've got a bit lopsided, never mind. So extrinsic feedback can come from a couple of places. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this, but the first thing is that we could get extrinsic feedback from outside of us, from the outcome. I strike a football with my foot and the ball reaches the teammate who I was attempting to pass to. That is an outcome. It's extrinsic information on which I can base a judgment of my performance. But I might also receive information from someone like a coach who might be saying to me, hey James, great pass, do that again. So something along those lines, hopefully something a bit more technical than the way I just described it. But you get the point. I'm receiving intrinsic and extrinsic information on which I can base an adaptation or change or continuation of my performance. So fine, we've got this intrinsic and extrinsic, all seems pretty simple. Let's take this a bit further. What else do we have? Well, we have the difference between what we describe, let me do it in green and red. We've got the difference between what we describe as positive feedback and negative feedback. Now, I should stress, this is not the same as good feedback and bad feedback, okay? But positive feedback would be things, I'll just go straight down here, it could be things such as praise. I receive encouragement and praise. In fact, it could be something like success. I mentioned my pass reaches the recipient, that is a success. That's a form of positive feedback. And it could also be intrinsic. It could be a feeling of correctness. That's where that kinesthesis comes in, right? A feeling of correctness. That's what we mean by positive feedback. Whereas our negative feedback could be something such as criticism. And don't see that as necessarily a bad thing or something that shouldn't happen. That could be a coach correcting his or her performer's sort of technique or decision making, whatever it happens to be. It could be failure. I'm on the free throw line in a game of basketball. I take a shot and my shot sort of rims out. So that would be an example of failure. It would be negative feedback encouraging me to adjust something. I could also get an internal sense, a kinesthetic sense of poor technique or being out of balance or being in the wrong position. These are examples of feedback that we can consider here. Two further ones that I think are really lovely for you to get really confident with. And these are what we would call temporal forms of feedback or time-based. One is feedback that's concurrent, more of which in a second. The other form of feedback is what we call terminal. Try to build this language in to your thinking. Try and build this language into your writing. What is concurrent feedback then? Concurrent feedback happens during performance. During performance. So go back to that skier I referred to on the moguls. I'm not sure if you know what moguls are, that sort of very lumpy, humpy, kind of very rapid adjustment to one's technique as you descend a slope, But we could be getting this sort of concurrent sort of feeling of balance or being out of balance during the performance. We can adjust it within there. And we could say here that because it's ongoing, it can influence or it influences ongoing performance. Okay, so that's a really interesting thing. Concurrent feedback is what you might call in-game data. And what I mean by that is it's how you're performing now before the performance ends. Now that's actually really useful. Not all sports, of course, enable that because of the nature of them. Let's think about a golf tee shot. You know, you take the tee shot and by the time you figure out whether the ball's gone straight or not, there's nothing you can do about it. That ball's gone, okay? So we've also got terminal feedback, and terminal feedback comes after the performance, not necessarily after the whole performance, but after the technique has been fulfilled. And what we get here is that we find that terminal feedback, it influences our subsequent performance. And when I say subsequent, obviously what we mean there is the next time we do that thing, okay? So I'll use my golf example. We've got a golfer on the tee and she strikes the ball and she hucks left. That's going to influence the next tee shot she plays, where she might adjust her technique to avoid that happening again. And finally, guys, two final ones I want to introduce you to, and if one can have favourite forms of feedback, I like these because we can call them KOR, more of which in a second, and the other one is what we can call KOP. Okay, so let me see if I can clarify for you what these are. KOR is knowledge of results. Okay, now obviously by definition this becomes terminal feedback because it's a result, it's after this thing's happened. So it's based on what the outcome of the performance was. You know, it could be something like win, lose. It could be something like success, failure. It could be something like in, out. This is what we're talking about. This is a form of terminal feedback. Okay, you find out what was the result of what I did, and that of course can allow you to adjust the next performance. But we've also got KOP. And KOP is knowledge of performance. Okay, knowledge of performance. Now, you might be expecting me to say, well, this is concurrent, ongoing. It can be concurrent. It's not always concurrent, but knowledge of performance. This can often be a feeling. Am I in the right position? That sort of proprioceptive, kinesthetic feel. It's definitely what we describe as qualitative, in the sense that it provides us information on our technique. And sometimes, or let's say it can be concurrent. But don't forget, it can also be terminal, because a coach could speak to us and say, "Look, when you're bowling in that over, James, you need to get your shoulder higher, so your arc is higher, so you're bowling from a higher point." That's a knowledge of performance, but it's not concurrent, so just be aware of that. So just to recap, guys, what have we got here? We've effectively got 8 types of feedback: intrinsic, extrinsic, positive, negative, concurrent, terminal, core, and COP. Knowledge of results, knowledge of performance. That's it.